Let's go off the grid.
Okay.
Let's go off the grid.
Okay.
I know that you really want to put your phone away.
Yeah.
Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome or welcome back to Off the Grid, a podcast about sharing your work and making money online without relying on social media. I'm your host, Amelia Freebie, and on this show, I share stories, strategies, and experiments for starting or growing a creative small business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. I'm coming to you from the depths of my summer break, which is time that I take off from the podcast every summer so I can do fun things like travel, soak in the pool, and also get up to some behind the scenes business experiments, which I have been busy with in July and am excited to pop up here and tell you all about what I've been up to. So if you're new here, I want to remind you that this is a totally free podcast paired with the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit, which you can find at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. I show up here with radical generosity every Wednesday when we're in season to offer you interviews, ideas, all sorts of episodes on marketing, creativity, intuition, small business, breaking up with big tech. And I hope that you enjoy this public podcast. I hope you enjoy the episodes. I hope you grab the free toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. And I'm happy to provide all of that here. Alongside that, however, this podcast is becoming my full-time work. And so I have a few paid offerings. And one of those paid offerings is the Off the Grid Clubhouse. This is bonus episodes, behind the scenes content, and other perks for paid supporters of the show. I started the Clubhouse in, I believe, the summer of 2024, and it was originally hosted on Substack, where it's been for the past 2 years. But I've documented here over the past 12 months or so how Substack has become more and more like social media, and I really felt like I needed to leave Substack to keep up with the ethos of this show around leaving social media. So this month, while I've been on my summer break, I did the behind the scenes project of migrating the Clubhouse from Substack to Ghost. So I'm very excited to share that the Off the Grid Clubhouse is now hosted on Ghost. You can find us at offthegrid.ghost.io, and that's where you can get those bonus episodes, behind the scenes updates. I do seasonal financial reviews there. I do listener Q&As there. And to celebrate the new launch, the relaunch of the Clubhouse on Ghost, I'm currently hosting an AMA, or an Ask Me Anything, for paid subscribers, which is an opportunity for you to ask me any question that you like and get my answer, feedback, have it show up on the private podcast in the Clubhouse, or maybe even here on the public show. So if you love Off the Grid, if you want to support this work, if you've gotten a lot from the free episodes and you have $5 a month or $50 a year to chip in, I would love to invite you to join the Clubhouse. Again, you can find it at the link in the show notes or offthegrid.ghost.io. Come on over this week to take part in the AMA, which is wrapping on July 31st. And stick around because I have some exclusive interviews coming in the Clubhouse in August. I will be answering all those questions I get exclusively for paid subscribers there throughout the fall. There's just a lot of great stuff that you get when you join the Clubhouse, including knowing that you're supporting this free show continuing to exist. So with that announcement made, I'm so excited to share today's interview with you, where I will be talking to the person who really inspired me to finally get off of Substack. That person is Lex Roman of Revenue Rulebreaker. Lex has been an entrepreneur for over 6 years now, working in so many different types of businesses as a service provider, as an agency owner, running memberships, subscriptions, digital products, events, sponsorships, speaking, writing, licensing. I love talking to Lex because they've really done it all, and they've tried so many different things as they've found their path toward their current business. Now, their current business is called Revenue Rulebreaker, and it is an indie small biz media platform that you can find at revenuerulebreaker.com. And there, Lex shares stories and events about how small business owners, solopreneurs, micro entrepreneurs like us actually make money. It's relatable stories, realistic revenue numbers, actual experiences, and it is such a breath of fresh air. Revenue Rulebreaker is also hosted on Ghost. It is a media site that you can peruse and read all the articles, but also a newsletter where you can get them in your inbox multiple times a week. And you can support Lex's work by becoming a paid subscriber. So you'll find more links in the show notes for that. I hope you'll head to revenuerulebreaker.com/newsletter to sign up. And then Lex has a discount code and special link for Off the Grid listeners if you become a paid supporter. So in this conversation, Lex and I are going to talk about the state of small business media and why we need more people sharing about our work. We'll talk about why we're committed to being creators, even though that is a challenging business model. We'll share more about how Lex helped me decide to leave Substack and move to Ghost. And we'll offer some ideas about what newsletter and podcast tools might work for you if you want paid content to be a part of your business. So I hope that you will tune in to hear us talk about making content, raising revenue, and moving off Substack. Lex is so smart, knows so much about what's going on in online business, and has a slightly different perspective than me. You'll hear us disagree on some things, which honestly, I loved because I think that we need more and more voices in this space. So thank you, dear listener, for tuning in. I hope you're having a wonderful summer. I hope you will join the Off the Grid Clubhouse and Revenue Rulebreaker to get more great stories throughout August. And for now, here's my conversation with Lex Roman of Revenue Rulebreaker. Hi, Lex. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Thanks for having me.
I am really pumped to have you. You know, I've been following your work for a while now because we have so many shared people in our orbits. But we actually finally got on a call earlier this spring, and it's been fun to sort of tease out those connections and continue to, just build different partnerships, collaborations between our worlds. Even, I think they're similar and quite different simultaneously, and I'm excited to dig into that in today's conversation. I wanted to start by asking you to tell us a bit about your journey with self-employment, because one of my favorite things about watching you is that I feel like you pivot relentlessly and you just keep momentum even when you're making huge changes. And I feel like you've landed in something that's really, really working for you. Could you take listeners along on the journey? When did you decide to go out on your own, become self-employed, and what are some of the iterations of the businesses you've built since then?
I love a pivot. I'm picturing that meme from Friends with Ross. Pivot. Yeah. I started my business in 2019. Like many entrepreneurs, I didn't necessarily set out to be an entrepreneur. I just wanted to stop having a boss. I was like, I don't like these anymore. I would really like to choose what I do every day. So I left my full-time job in 2019. I took a contract at that time with a company called Gusto, which does payroll and HR for small businesses.
Happy Gusto user here.
Yeah, awesome. Me too. I was with them for 6 months on a fully dedicated contract. It was a very easy way to transition out of full-time work into what is basically full-time work, but without the boss scenario, right? Which freed me up to really think about what kind of clients I might want to work with. And then we all know in 2020, a lot changed for all of us in the world and in the business world. And coming out of the end of 2020 into 2021, I was like, I really can't work with tech. I had been in tech for 10 years. I really didn't want to work with tech. I didn't like how tech responded to the pandemic or to the racial reckoning in the summer 2020. And I was like, I just don't think this is my scene anymore. I think I've come to the end of my tech career. And so I started looking at the small business space. All of these businesses during 2020 had to go online, right? I had been really involved in my local community. I was involved in my local chamber of commerce. I knew sort of the struggles of the restaurants and the bookstores and, all these little brick and mortars. And I was like, I wonder if I could bring my tech skills, my marketing skills to Main Street, so to speak. And I shifted into being a digital marketing firm for small business owners. I learned doing that brick and mortar businesses, there's a reason why none of the restaurants have good websites. There's a reason why the bookstores are struggling. They're not really bought in on digital marketing. That's a generalization. But it was harder to sell to them than I anticipated. I ended up shifting more into the online business space. I launched a membership in 2022, which was, a marketing membership for online business owners, small business owners, but typically creative service providers, designers, copywriters, coaches, operations consultants. And then coming out of that, I started working with journalists. I started seeing that journalists were getting laid off. I pivoted into the journalism space for a couple years. And I realized that there's a huge gap in the small business media space. There's a huge opportunity in the media space right now, whether you were a journalist or not. And I wanted to take advantage of it. I had sort of like learned the ropes working with journalists. And so I launched a small business publication called Rulebreaker, and that's what I'm doing now.
Thank you for laying that out so clearly. The way you talked about it, it felt like very linear, but I'm sure it was much more like looping and stop-start as you went, as all, pivoting and evolutional journeys go. I'm curious, what I was hearing along the way is that you also tried out different business models. So I think you kind of emphasized like how you were serving different clientele, but from my perspective, it sounds like you did, agency service-based business model. You tried membership-based business model, and now you're in the sort of media publication-based business model. Can you talk a little bit about how did those models work for you? What shifted as you went? Like, you're not only experimenting with different clientele, but different models too. I think that's really interesting.
Yes, very astute observation, Amelia. Yes, I love business model experimentation. It's actually the premise of Revenue Rulebreaker, right? It's like we dig into different business models because I find them fascinating. Part of what made me initially go self-employed back in 2019 was not just that I didn't want to have a boss, but also I was getting lots of opportunities to speak at that time. I had been asked by a publisher in tech to write a book. And I was already starting to dabble in like course creation and digital products. And I was interested in exploring those different like revenue streams. And I knew that having my own business would allow me to do that. Like I ended up saying no to the book because I was asked to do it while I had a full-time job. And I just knew I wouldn't be able to do both. As like an independent business owner, you get to decide, okay, no, I'm writing a book, right? And I'm going to just take one client to get me through that period or whatever you want to do. So since then, I've spent a lot of time like trying to access those different business models. Like, what does it look like if speaking isn't just a thing that I do for brand development, right? For a long time, it was just like, get my name out there, get better work, get better clients. What if it is a job or part of my job? I was getting paid to speak, but it wasn't like, I couldn't pay my rent with it, but it was like, what if I could pay my rent with it, right? Like, that'd be cool. And then same thing with anything else, right? The courses, I sold like an analytics course for designers. It did okay. And I was like, I wonder if I could like do more of this. Like, what would it look like to make this more of a business? So I've always really enjoyed that. I don't enjoy service work. I came out of the agency world. So the model that I worked with Gusto was very much, this is exactly how I'm used to working. But I also don't like working this way. I can do it for money, but I don't enjoy it. I really like creating stuff for people. Like I like making courses. I like teaching classes. I like writing. I used to be a designer. I used to be a filmmaker. I like creating stuff. And so my journey over the last 6 years has really been me trying to figure out how can I make creating stuff my full-time job?
Which is an enticing and fraught question.
I mean, I think when you say creating stuff, it's obviously super vague. People immediately go to content creator, which I would say I am now a content creator, as are you. Maybe you identify with that, maybe you don't.
It's accurate.
It's a scarier business model because it can be more volatile. You can pretty much always get client work. You really just can. It's always my fallback. I'll say right now, I'm in a season where like sponsorships are harder for me right now. And so I'm having to like pivot a different business model in, which has been events. And so I'm pivoting sort of within even my existing overarching business model right now. But I also like find that challenge fun. And I think for me, I would way rather have a challenge on the sales side than a challenge on the execution. I think a lot of people feel like, I don't want to sell, I don't want to market, just give me clients to work with. I feel the opposite. I would rather spend all my time marketing and selling and not have to work with people. And that's what my job is now.
100%. This is why we have many similarities. Loving the marketing and sales side is what it takes, I think, to be a successful creator and content creator at this point in the 2026 internet. And when I talk about my business journey, I also like always trace that like when I wanted to be full-time self-employed, when I quit my last job and I didn't have a ton of runway. I was like, I have maybe 6 months to like recreate my full-time income, which for me was not that much money. I was a chronic under-earner, but I needed to make it work. And so I started a podcast production studio. I started a service-based business because I was like, this is the fastest path back to a full-time income as a self-employed person. And I like to emphasize that like it wasn't because it was my soul's calling to be a podcast editor, right? It was not the thing that brought me the most joy. It was the thing that I had historically been able to charge the most money for. It was a very practical decision. And I like to encourage people, like especially if you're trying to transition out of full-time employment to like full-time self-employment, I think that, as you said, like client work is much easier to book. People are faster to pay someone else to do something for them, and they'll spend more money doing that than they are to pay for a course to learn how to do it themselves, content to change their thinking around something. Service provider work has higher rates and I think is easier to sell than other types of work when you're just starting out. I've seen that over and over and over again. And so I love how you sort of also transitioned into self-employment through contract work, through service work, and then into now being a content creator. And yeah, we're like, and similarly, like it's taken me 5 years to make that shift. It sounds like it's taken you like 6 or 7 at this point to really be in this position. So what is the model of Revenue Rulebreaker now? Or like, what are the revenue streams you have going? You mentioned you're pivoting, but I'm so curious, like, let's talk about how indie media publications make money. I'm happy to talk about how mine does because I think it's also not exactly what people expect. So can you just tell us a little bit about like how you make money in your business?
I can. And I think more of us need to be doing it. So many people just are like, oh yeah, I write this blog for free. I make this podcast for free. It's like, no, get paid. Let's get paid. Yes. My top 2 revenue streams historically have been subscriptions from readers and sponsorships. Now, I mentioned that I'm having a hard time with sponsorships right now. We have been fully booked on sponsorships for like the last year and a half, but I have a pretty high bar for who I will take sponsorships from. And so we're in this like AI frenzy right now. I don't really want to partner with AI companies. So it's trickier for me to find a good fit where I feel good about advertising for them and they're going to pay my rates. So backup revenue streams on the Rulebreaker side, events is a huge one. I just did a quarter-long season of events for my audience in Q1, and I also am doing a cohort on paid subscriptions, which is also for my audience, which is like a 6-week cohort for folks that want to get serious about paid subscriptions. I also make a little bit of money from licensing and affiliate. Those are pretty small revenue streams right now. So those are the main ones. Those are the main ways. That Revenue Rulebreaker is my primary income stream. So I've been very focused on the sponsorships. Subscription stuff is going pretty well. There's a little patch on the subscription thing, which is that sometimes I run like a fundraising campaign. Right now I'm doing one to fund our guest writers for Q2. And it's just a patch. It's like I have paid subscribers who already pay me at the highest rate that I offer, who want to give more money. And so this is a way for them to do that. And it's a way to offset some of our expenses. But subscriptions and sponsorships are the core revenue streams. And, you know, even though we've hit a rough patch with sponsors, it will continue to be an important, like I'll continue to chase that and work on that.
Yeah, I think that's so exciting and interesting and is definitely, like I think traditional independent media, those are kind of the 2 main pillars, right? You see like sponsorships and advertisers, and then you see subscription models, and doing that together is how I've seen publications grow. For me at Off the Grid, it's been interesting. Part of the reason I don't refer to it as a media brand in full is because that's not my primary mode of monetizing. We have paid subscribers through the Clubhouse, but to be perfectly honest, that's only making around $10,000 a year. The bulk of my Off the Grid income comes from the interweb, which is our paid membership, and then Close Biz Friends, which is a group program I host in the membership. So I'm still making money as a teacher and facilitator more than I am making money from the content that I create. My goal over the next 5 years is to like switch that again and be making even more money for the content. And I think it would be great if making Off the Grid podcast was my full-time job at some point. But also, I like that I have multiple things going on because, as you've said, it is precarious. And especially in podcasting, like the role of sponsorship is kind of fraught. And it changes a lot. And the value of a podcast listener has dropped dramatically to advertisers specifically over the past few years. And so I do have sponsors on the podcast, but they are exclusively listeners. It's all tiny businesses.
Yeah, which is great. And actually, that's one of the pivots that I've made in this season. I used to only book like full-time partnerships where it was like a month minimum campaign, which is, you know, a 4-figure investment. But I have readers and particularly paid subscribers who are like, I'd like to advertise with you. So I've now created a way for people to buy newsletter ads off the shelf. They can actually just buy them on my website now, which I haven't done in a long time. It's been a couple of years. Like I did it back in my low energy leads days, which you might recall, my former newsletter. But I haven't done it in the Rulebreaker world until now because I'm seeing an appetite from my base and they get the value of what I'm doing more than some advertisers do. But I think your point about the interweb and the group coaching program, you know, what I've seen from journalists is like they're expanding into these spaces too. Ryan Broderick, who writes Garbage Day, has a consulting firm. He'll do custom reporting for your organization using his like journalism skills. Alyssa Walker, who writes Torched, which is about the LA Olympics, hosts like specific mastermindy kind of things for nonprofit leaders. So I don't think that media revenue streams have to be so cut and dry like subscriptions, sponsorships. I do think memberships, even if they're higher touch, can play into that. And I even think coaching programs is. I think the question is the audience the same? If the audience is different for the podcast than for the group coaching program, then maybe it's not so tied together. Because if there's a world which you shut down off the grid and the group coaching program is exactly the same, then it's not quite so tied together. But it really comes down to, is this the space that you're sharing with your audience? Like, is off the grid the space? And I would say it probably is.
Yeah, absolutely. The podcast is the center of my business. That's how I always put it. And so, yes, there's complete audience alignment between who listens to the show and everything that I sell. And I love that perspective on like, is it a media brand? And it's so interesting because I have been saying all year, I've been like going out searching. I'm like, who are other people who have a podcast at the center of their business the way I do? And there aren't so many of them, honestly. Like even the other podcasters in the space that I would say have bigger shows than me, like I think of somebody like Andy Pizza and Creative Pep Talks, like his actual business is much more immersed in publishing. He sells books and it works because of his podcast audience, which is significantly larger than mine, to be clear. But it's like this little way that you and I are doing things. I can't find a lot of other people who are doing it quite like this.
Yes, I agree. There's not a lot of us, and I think there could be more of us because a lot of us in the service, you know, creative space have been taught content is the funnel to the clients. And it certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. If you are serious about creating interesting stories and you don't feel like you really want all of that to be funnily, like, you know, I think, Amelia, a lot of what you're producing on this show, there's not like a direct angle to like, and that's why you should join the interweb, and that's why you should be in my group coaching program, right? And so if your podcast is like genuinely interesting and you are creating original content, you have that opportunity. And so I think there's a lot of space for it. But yeah, I don't see a lot of people doing it. And part of it is that it's expensive and time consuming to create valuable content. And so if you haven't figured out a way to monetize that in a way that makes sense, or you don't have the close-knit community that you and I do, where those things are really intertwined, the community and the media side, it doesn't make financial sense for you to do it, which is why I'm trying to get more people like us who have like the nugget of a really valuable media business to learn the monetization things, the different revenue streams, and even to think about it the way that we just talked about your business so that it is more tied together and they're getting more value out of it.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting as a podcast producer. You know, I'm not doing that as much now, but it was what I did full time for the past 5 years. And when I would work with clients, you know, my clientele, they were all business owners. And we would have to have this heart to heart where they would come to me and they'd be like, my podcast is going to grow my business. And I would be like, it's probably not. Especially people who would see the success of Off the Grid and be like, I want that for my podcast and my business. And I'd have to tease apart for them that Off the Grid actually doesn't directly sell softer sound stuff. These are kind of two different things. I'm still figuring that out. And also, the amount of time and energy it takes me to make Off the Grid good enough that it eventually could be a business that stands on its own. I used to always have to tell people, like, I edit all day on Saturdays. Like, I work really hard at this. And it's not to glorify the overwork of it all, but to say that it is a real effort to be excellent at the content that you create. It is not just recording a quick episode and publishing it. And if what you want your podcast or your newsletter to do is like support your business and just kind of keep your name in the top of people's minds and your work, like your perspective out there, that's great. But that's not enough to make an actual media business from whatever content you might be creating.
Right. Yeah. You have to choose. Do I want to be producing stories for people, or do I really just want clients? Am I looking just for the fastest path to clients? Yeah. I think podcasts, some people are drawn to it, as a lead generation tool because they just think it sounds fun. And then I think they realize how much work it is and then they just burn out, right? Like very rarely do we see folks who are service providers create a podcast brand that really is just about lead gen for them, stay in the game for more than 2 years. It's too much work. It's too expensive. They just burn out. They're like, you know what? There's easier ways. I can just go to a networking lunch and pick up a couple clients and I'm good. I don't need to do this whole podcast thing. I think we have to shift away from that. It's great. If you want to do a podcast as a lead gen thing and you find it fun and it fits into your budget, awesome. But I really think we need to consider, like, do you want to create a podcast that's valuable? If so, you need to think of that podcast as a business and it can feed other parts of your business or other businesses that you have. Absolutely. There's no one saying that it needs to stand alone, but like it needs to be its own business and you can conceive of it that way. Don't be afraid. It's possible. The opportunity is now. Take charge. Sorry. I went into Tony Robbins mode.
I was like, whoa, here we go.
I really believe it though. Like to your point, Amelia, like there's not that many of us doing this. There just aren't, because a lot of small business owners are struggling. We understand that. And they're just like quickest cash now, which I totally get. But there's a huge vacuum of small business conversations. So much of what's out there is either corporate slop that is being paid through Forbes or Inc. or whatever, or it's funnel garbage. It's like, let me tell you the story of whatever. And surprise, I sell that same thing. The amount of trustworthy conversations that are happening right now, they're not many.
I mean, that resonates with me so much, but it also resonates with listeners because someone who joined the interweb recently wrote to me and said, I am so tired of signing up for freebies and having to unsubscribe from misaligned newsletters over and over and over and over again. And I was like, yes, that is it. The way we are conceiving of sharing knowledge through content in the small business and online business space is only as a means to the end of getting you to buy the thing. And I think there are compelling reasons that people aren't starting media projects and brands, largely because of the narrative and the reality from the media world that it's all crumbling. But what I have found is that for folks like us who we have the business foundations, we understand how business models work, we understand how monetization works. And yes, we love what we create and we're obsessed with it and we're trying to be excellent at it. But we're also very well aware of how it exists in a commodified industry. There is a lot of opportunity for us. I would completely agree. So I'm curious, Lex, what advice would you have for someone who's listening to this and okay, I have a newsletter or I have a podcast. They're a weirdo like me. And they're like, I think I want to try to take the leap. I want this to be revenue generating. I want it to be a business in and of itself. What do you suggest they do next?
The first thing I think is to pick the model that you want to go after. So there's really 3 that I see primary models: subscriptions, sponsorships, and ads. I make a distinction between sponsorships and ads because particularly if you're a blogger, you can just hook up with an ad network and run display ads, for example, off of traffic. So if you're a blogger, you're in SEO, you can never, ever, ever talk to a brand and still make money off of ads. That's really different from what I do, which is I work with brands personally. I know my brand rep and I'm putting my reputation on the line for a specific brand, not just a group of brands. So those are 2 different models. Subscriptions and memberships have a very thin line. Media-first companies tend to do pretty hands-off subscriptions where the perks are bonus podcast episodes or a Zoom call behind the scenes with your hosts versus a membership, which tends to be more high touch. However, I see both models from media-first brands. Escape Collective is an example that comes to mind. They're a cycling brand, independent cycling publication. that came out of the end of Outside magazine, and they run a really high touch membership. They are a magazine. They produce like 30, 40 original stories a week, one of the prominent cycling news publications right now, but they have a Discord. They take their members on trips. What they're doing and what we're doing is very similar. So those are the three models: subscriptions, sponsorships, and ads. So I would think about which of those models feels most natural to you. The operating mode of those is quite different. With subscriptions, you're going to spend a lot of time with your community, understanding what they need and selling to that community, right? You're going to send a lot of emails. You're going to do a lot of podcast promotion. You're going to come up with some perks that you're going to deliver, not too many. And you're going to be delivering those and selling the subscription. And then you're going to be dealing with things like trying to win back canceled subscribers. It's a lot of like email and automation work. On the sponsorship side, you're doing sales. You're going to be pitching yourself a lot. You're going to be receiving inbound interest, and you're going to be scoping projects much like you do with clients. And you're going to think, okay, which channels am I, doing? Am I giving them a YouTube channel? Am I giving them ad rights? Like there's a lot to do there. So if you enjoy that, if you're like more of a client relationship person, you might really like that model. And then on the ad side, that's like a traffic game. So if you want to do display ads, you need to get really good at SEO and Pinterest. That's the game there.
Thank you so much for laying that out so clearly. I'm so grateful. It would have taken me like 3 podcast episodes to just articulate the things that you said in 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes, honestly. And I think it's also, once again, like sort of helping me shed light on why and how I've made the choices I've made. The reason I like the membership model is because I can charge more than a pure subscription, I would say, where like the expectation is that it will be pretty affordable, $5 to $10 a month, $100 a year, something like that is what I have in mind for digital subscriptions. Whereas with the membership, I'm currently at $199 a year. I think it will continue to go up as the community builds and the resources deepen. And part of the reason I chose that model, though, is because I love interfacing with people. I really wanted the community feeling. And I know there are ways that you've maintained that in your subscription model with events and things like that. But I love having a slightly higher touch approach in my membership. And also because I'm a publication for business owners, I'm very clear on the problems that membership solves, and people have them and they're willing to spend money to solve them. Something I see a lot of with publications or media-based businesses, they're more connected to what the creator wants to make than what problems their publication solves or their podcast solves for the, listener, reader, end user. And if that's the case, I just don't think it works at scale, right? If you're operating as an artist where you just make what you want to make, that is not a media business. You have to think of it as a business owner where you are like as obsessed with the problem that your person has as you are with what you want to make. That to me is really the key of it.
I think that's true in the B2B space. I don't know if it's necessarily true in all media businesses, but I do think it's a lot harder to just like produce cool stuff and like hope that the monetization works out. Like I see that all the time from journalists and even from artists. There are a few exceptions to that though, where what they're doing is just so cool and so unique that people will just like give them money even though they're not even really trying. The exception for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those people have some like beautifully exalted planets in their second house or whatever that I don't have. They have some blessings.
Most of us have to work at it. And I think those of us who have community skills, whether or not you approach your subscription as a membership or like me, try to keep it a little bit lighter touch, it benefits you in any business to be community minded and to do what you just said, which is like think about the problems that you're solving. Because even in a case where your media business isn't really like solving an active problem for someone, like let's say a local news publisher, for example, you want to do a newsletter about your small town, you're not necessarily solving a problem, but you are filling a need for them. And if you can understand what that is, understand why they're motivated, understand why they would pay you for that and show up and share what you're doing, that's what makes the business work. And so those skills are invaluable no matter your medium.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And also I think it's just kind of a bit of a language difference. Like I would say an unmet need is a problem. Right? That in and of itself. And some people like thinking of it as a problem is helpful, but I like the way you're phrasing it because if you're really like sitting here listening to this and being like, Amelia, there's not a problem my people have. They just want to see me make my ceramics and they're willing to pay for that. Great.
But it's like, why do they want to pay?
Yeah, because they need creative inspiration. And of course, I am speaking to like independent creators. This does not apply in the case of the Kardashians or celebrities. The celebrity model, totally different than what we're doing.
I think that's a really good point. I had like a LinkedIn post the other day and somebody mentioned like Katie Couric, or no, it was Kara Swisher. And I was like, not relevant. I don't understand why we're even bringing those people into the conversation. Like Kara Swisher is in another echelon. I have no idea what that's like, but she has nothing to do with what we're doing. And so, this celebrity stuff is really important. I do think a lot of celebrities have created these like weird media brands that are just like not good. And everyone's just like, this is so good. And it's like, no. You're just interested in celebrities. You're just listening to celebrities talk. That doesn't work for anyone else.
I 100% blame Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop for this. I feel like that is what happened.
Yes.
Like Goop was a successful media and just like product aggregation company. And now every celebrity is like, well, I have to do that.
I need my Goop. You want to hear a funny anecdote? The first time I ever heard about Goop, I was working on the TV show The Office, and it was written into a script that we were doing a parody about Goop. And I was like, what is Goop? And this was in like 2010. And I had no idea about it. And I thought it was something that they had made up. But then I learned later that it was a real company.
It does sound made up. I remember when it started, I was like, this can't be real. No one's going to care about this. And then it became everything that it became.
Celebrities can do whatever they want, They really can.
Yeah. And I think that even if you're not a celebrity, if you have the backing of the institutional powers, you're operating in a different lane than what you and I are talking about, Lex. We're talking about independent creators and companies. If you have a major network behind you, if you have a publisher behind you, it's different economics. It's a different model. It's a totally different world almost that you're living in. When, if you try to publish a book or put out a newsletter or do a podcast, even through like the iHeartRadio network or something, it's just different. The economics are different. The model is different. The monetization is different. And so that also means we can't look to those people to compare ourselves to them or to try to emulate them. It won't work for us because we're not celebrities and we don't have that backing.
Yes. And this brings us to a Substack. A lot of people will see Joy Reid or Jen Rubin leave their high-profile legacy media job, go to Substack, and all of a sudden overnight have 200,000 readers and God knows how many paid subscribers and be like, well, obviously Substack is the magic. And it's like, no. This person just left the Washington Post and they had 30 articles and they were on Good Morning America. That's why people flock to their Substack. It has nothing to do with Substack. And then those people get amnesia when they get over there and they're like, wow, Substack's so magic. And it's like, no, you were literally like famous. You were famous and all your famous friends wrote about how cool it was that you're going independent, quote unquote. And here you are basically rebuilding the establishment. We can't compare that. And that's an interesting thing too about what you and I do is niche. It's never going to be Amy Poehler's podcast or whatever, Call Your Daddy or whatever those things are in your world. Because it's for a smaller group of people who have a more advanced need. It's not mainstream content.
And embracing that instead of avoiding that or trying to like water yourself down to like be for everybody is really, really important. And I think it's part of the success of what we do. I also think just thinking of celebrities on Substack, whether they're like from legacy media or they're quote unquote actual celebrities, right? Like Lizzo and Charlie XCX and like the musicians or like George Saunders, like Elizabeth Gilbert, the super famous.
Charlie XCX?
Yeah, she has a Substack.
Oh, God.
Hamish talks about it all the time. I'm surprised you haven't seen it come up.
She seems like a legit rebel. What a facade.
I think for people in that position, though, what feels radical and revolutionary about Substack to them is they are used to not seeing the money forever, right? There are so many layers of institutionalization between the person who buys their stuff and the money they make that when they get on Substack, they're like, holy shit, this person paid and I just get, the $3.50 of every $5. I can't believe that's real. Like for them, it feels so different. But for those of us who have been out here watching the Stripe money come in for years, we're like, it's a different equation. It feels different.
Get an e-commerce store, Charlie. Yeah, crazy. That's crazy.
But to your point, more broadly, I do want to talk about Substack. And you are a pretty like vocal I don't know if maybe I'd call you a vocal critic of Substack. You're not a fan. That's clear. And you have not built Revenue Rulebreaker on Substack, even though you historically have had a Substack publication before this iteration of your business. So could you just talk a little bit about like why you don't think Substack is a good fit for fledgling or established indie media publications?
Yes, and it is not what people expect me to say. Brace yourselves. So obviously Substack is super problematic from a societal standpoint. We all know all of the controversies. And one thing I see a lot on Threads, Andrew Tate is the bestseller on Substack, and everyone's like, let's all leave Substack. And then some people are like, well, what about YouTube? What about Threads? What about Instagram? Like, these are all horrible companies. And that is a valid point. The problem with Substack is that they are stealing your audience and your revenue, and they are doing it slowly and under the radar. Revenue is a little bit more obvious. All Substack publishers who have a paid subscription know that you're giving 10% of that paid subscription to Substack. That is a huge percentage. And if you have more than a few paid subscribers, something like 20 paid subscribers, Molly White did this calculation, you're paying more to Substack than you would if you're paying a subscription fee to any other hosting platform or newsletter platform. So it becomes really big. And people, they're like, oh, well, they only make money when I make money. That's been Substack's tagline. But it's like, yeah, but they make a lot of money in the way that like a celebrity agent makes a lot of money. They're taking a big chunk of that income. It starts to become in the thousands of dollars pretty quickly. The other thing is that because they've built this like network where they're sharing users between publications, they're siphoning your audience away from you. So they are, one, encouraging your audience to turn off emails, which means that if you leave and you want to email people again, those people aren't used to receiving emails, and or they might be feeling unsubscribed when you export that list. They're also showing your audience, you're bringing a reader over into the Substack universe, and then they're selling other stuff to that audience. They're saying, hey, reader, do you want to subscribe to this publication? Hey, reader, do you want to get our app? Because you can read all kinds of stuff. They're inundating them with other publications. They're trying to sell them on other publications. They're siphoning those people away from you. They're taking their attention away. They're taking them off of your email list. And then they're also taking your revenue. And there's been increasingly like case studies or examples where Substack doesn't want you to sell your own stuff. They want to be able to sell their stuff and push their own model on everybody. There's been some cases recently where people's publications have been shut down for being too self-promotional. So the other thing for those of you that are small businesses, if you are trying to sell anything other than your paid subscription, and I would even say sometimes the paid subscription, Substack does not like that. It's technically against their terms of service. So you could be shut down. I've seen a few cases where that's been the case. We haven't seen that in a widespread way, but I think that's only going to be the case more. I'll add one last thing. Aside from the audience and revenue thing, I think that because of the way Substack is funded by private equity and the specific venture capitalists that back them, including Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, and some of the things that those venture capitalists have voiced, and private equity, I think that we are headed for a buyout moment like TikTok or Twitter. So Substack is really prime with all the celebrity voices, all the journalists, all of us as readers and participants in that, to be sold off as a vehicle for mainstream media control. We've already seen that that's valuable with TikTok and Twitter. So I think that that is the logical endpoint of Substack.
Mic drop. Thank you. You have that so honed. I love it. And listeners, when I announced in the spring that I was going to move the Clubhouse off of Substack, that happened a week after I had a conversation with Lex. And we had just met, so you weren't like, Amelia, get the fuck off Substack. But the subtext was a little bit like, if you're really trying to do this media thing, you need to get off of Substack. And I really sat with that. And for so many of the reasons that you just pointed out, when I initially shared that, like a big thing that frustrates me is the way that Substack contacts my subscribers without my knowledge, to tell them about other publications, as you've mentioned, to, ask them to recommend things or look at things or see notes or get the app. There are so many emails that Substack sends my subscribers that I don't know about. And to me, that became a real issue also because of the ethos of my work, right? Like Off the Grid is about leaving social media. And it used to be the case that I felt like I could, say and stand on it that just because I'm using Substack doesn't mean everyone else has to be on the app or do the whole Substack thing. And now with how much they're reaching out to people subscribed to the Clubhouse, I just don't think I can say that in an honest way anymore. If I'm on Substack, then the people on my list are being pushed to use Substack, and I'm uncomfortable with that. It's a big problem for me with a platform about not being on social media. The one sort of like objection I can hear to sort of what you've said that comes up a lot with my community is that a lot of people don't have an audience. So they don't actually care if Substack is siphoning people off. They're like, I got nobody. Give me somebody. Let me get that siphoning, right? I would love to have some of someone else's subscribers siphoned to me. What do you think about Substack for that person? Like, do you think it is like a compelling use case, or are you still unconvinced?
I have never seen that work. I mean, I would ask you, like, is that how you built your audience there? Because I would guess no.
No, I mean, there's certainly people that came through Substack recommendations and Substack itself, but they are my least engaged, never upgrading subscribers.
Right. That's what I hear a lot from journalists who have left. So I think that's the myth of Substack. And I think it goes back to Substack's entire strategy, which is so flimsy, it's hilarious, is get close to rich and famous people and get them to bring their audience to Substack. Like that's their whole game. That has always been their game. Talk to Charlie XCX, talk to Jen Rubin, talk to, Joy Reid and get them onto Substack. And then like, oh, look, we brought all these users to Substack and now they're here for all the rest of you. But the reality is, if you really have no audience, nothing's going to happen on your Substack. You would have to start building relationships where you do get those mutual recommendations, in which case you could pretty much do that anywhere, right? You could build those relationships on any platform. You could even build them with Substack writers and you're on a different platform. You do those cross promotions. You have to do that work anyway. Like Substack doesn't just send free audience people your way. If you're doing your own audience building and you have relationships with other writers, then you will see some free Substack growth. But it's pretty negligible. And like you said, Amelia, like a lot of those folks, tend to be not engaged because they're being subscribed in mass to hundreds of publications at once. It's like that recommendations feature, which was really powerful when they launched it in like 2021, I think, 2022. It was really powerful. I think it's like over now. I think it is so oversaturated and I just think it's kind of a dead end. I think what people are better off doing is finding a few peers who really have audience overlap with you to do intentional collaborations with multiple times a year. You feature them, they feature you. You do podcast episodes like this, you do live streams, they talk in your community. That to me feels more meaningful. And when I, really dig into it with Substack publishers who are panicked about losing that growth, it's really only a couple people that are sending them most of that growth. And often you can just establish a relationship with them one-on-one.
Ugh, so true. I guess one of the nice things about the recommendation feature is you can see which publications are bringing people to you, which does give you knowledge that, okay, so-and-so is recommending a bunch of people. I should just go talk to them. I should actually build a relationship. I would get more people from their publication if they wrote an essay about me or we did an interview together or I featured them and they were willing to like put a note about my work at the top of their emails for a few weeks, something like that. I also think that learning those strategies, again, this goes back to like one of my frustrations with social media. Getting good at the algorithm is a non-transferable skill. Getting good at this like weird Substack recommendation engine is a non-transferable skill. Learning to cross-promote through relationship building is an incredibly transferable skill. You could do that in so many ways. And, this group program that I teach is about the practice of cross-promotion and how to create a free or low-cost resource that's very cross-promotable, how to share it, how to get other people on board. And the whole purpose of the group is we share each other's things. That's how you grow without social media. That's the only answer I have.
That's how you grow even with social media. There's no shortcut to this stuff. Everybody thinks like, I'll just get on Instagram, I'll just get on Substack and free audience will come my way. It's just not the reality.
It's truly not.
I love the non-transferable skill thing because it is like, I do feel like people they spend so much time learning like Reels or the Substack notes thing. And it's like, why are you doing that? Just talk to people.
Very true. Okay, so Lex, if people don't want to be on Substack, where do they go? What do they use? How have you set up Revenue Rulebreaker? What are the alternatives to this, very sticky, popular platform?
Yes. Okay, I want to say I learned about 2 new platforms today. There are so many options. I usually recommend 4, but there are so many. And I would really encourage folks to research what's cool and hot because I think it's really dangerous for us all to go to one place. I think platform diversity is our strength. I think we all have to stay nimble and we can't rely on any of these tech companies long term. Like we have to be ready to move at a moment's notice, like hurricane style. So I am on a platform called Ghost, which is an open source tool. It's very popular with journalists because it's open source and because it is based in Singapore. It's an international company, not based in the US. You can host with Ghost. They have like a hosted version, or you can host off of Ghost like WordPress. You can host with a third-party host. That's the platform that I've chosen. I like it. It's fairly minimalistic. Like it is primarily a blog with paid subscription opportunities and then also has a newsletter, but it's not as full-featured as like MailChimp or Kit or MailerLite or any of those newsletter platforms. Kit is also an option, and I think for service providers who are on Substack, that is the most logical choice because Kit has such strong segmentation and automation capabilities. If you're not a fan of Kit, which I'll say I'm not a huge fan of Kit, you could go to Email Octopus or MailerLite or any other like newsletter tool if you wanted to off of Substack. If you want a newsletter tool, but you want a little bit of a blog, there's a tool called Button Down, which is really nice and I think does not get enough airtime. Their blog isn't as bloggy as Substack's, meaning like it really does look like an email archive.
They call it an archive too. So there is that.
It's a nice tool. I think it's a bootstrapped company. The founder's cool. They have good automations. Like it's pretty solid. I would say if you don't need a huge blog presence or if you want to separate the list from the blog, that could be an interesting one. And then the last one is Beehive. Beehive is a pretty common one because it has a lot of the tooling that Substack has. They just built a podcast hosting feature and they do recommendations. They do paid recommendations. They have lots of growth features. Beehive is really strong. For me, the biggest drawback of Beehive is that you have to design your website and it's like really clunky and drag and drop. Like you have to design all sorts of little widgets and fonts. I hate that. It used to be more plug and play, but they bought TypeDream and now it's like extremely customizable. Beehive is targeting bigger and bigger media brands. I still think they're pretty strong. They're venture backed, so they're a ticking time bomb a bit, but for now they're fine.
I appreciate all of these options. And it has been interesting, even since we spoke a few months ago. And I was like, I need these platforms to do podcasting. And you were a little bit like, I don't know that they're going to. Why would they? But now I'm like, okay, Ghost is now integrating with Transistor. Beehive, I didn't realize had launched in like actual podcasting, which as we're recording this looks like less than 2 weeks ago that's come out. Part of the reason I've stayed on Substack is because none of the other tools have had the functionality I needed. But I think in 2026, that's no longer true. They're finally moving into the because I need to have a paid podcast model with the newsletter. I'm like, people give it to me.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I'm glad that Substack has created enough demand for that people are building tools. Something else I think about when we choose different platforms and we use them or align ourselves with them is some people are very defeatist about the idea of leaving a platform because they're like, that's not going to do anything to their bottom line. And honestly, that can be true. When everyone talked about leaving Spotify in 2025, they had their highest record profit year ever, right?
Yeah.
But the way I like to look at it is because so many people wanted to leave Spotify, Qobuz was actually able to come into existence and become a sustainable company, right? So it's not that by leaving Substack, we're going to take Substack down. It has this venture capital backing. It has celebrities. It's not going anywhere. We can help these other companies become more viable. We can have a more competitive marketplace, which at least in the realm of capitalism is theoretically an overall good. Right. And so that's part of why I'm so invested in leaving. I mean, there's a lot of values misalignment, both with the things that Substack is doing and also with my own platform. But also, I want to see these other competitors thrive. I want to see there be other options. And I love what you said about platform diversity, because I do think that's incredibly important. Anytime we're all in one place at a SaaS or tech company in this world, it becomes this big fish that just wants to get acquired. And you don't very often see people resist the dollar signs that come with that, even if they started as a really values aligned tiny company. So,
yeah, I mean, look at MailChimp. MailChimp was bootstrapped and then they sold out to Intuit and boned all their early employees. Yeah, I love that idea that we could get indie companies into existence. I think there is this really cool, if there's any hope in the technology scene right now, there is kind of a cool resurgence of independent tech companies that are bootstrapped, meaning they don't have venture capital or traditional investors. They're small teams and they're just trying to do something good. Fastmail is a good example of that. Now, Fastmail's been around for 25 years. They're an Australian company that does email service provisions. So you can swap Google Workspace for Fastmail, but they're a great example of that. They're bootstrapped, they're successful, they're independent, they're anti-big tech. PayHip is another one, an e-commerce platform. Same thing, bootstrapped, independent, small team out of the UK. Outpost, which is a paid partner of mine, one of my main sponsors, which is a tool for ghost publishers, independent tech company out of Oakland, less than 10 people on that team. So that's really cool. And I think supporting companies like that, it definitely feels better. It also gives you a direct line to those founders so you can talk to them and ask them things and sort of build with them in the image of your business.
And the same is true of our media brands, right? When people divert their attention from listening to a Fast Company podcast, do they even have podcasts? An Entrepreneur Magazine podcast.
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
A HubSpot network podcast, we can say. Like when you divert your attention from them, it's probably not going to take HubSpot down. But by listening to my show or reading your work instead, it makes a big difference. And you and I are both incredibly responsive creators. Like you write to us, you become a part of our paid communities, like you have access to us. You can shape the future of what happens here in a way that you can't by listening to, a legacy media show.
Yes. The future.
I'm always on this with people. I'm like, stop listening to networked podcasts. Listen to independent podcasts. Stop reading the legacy media publications. Like, subscribe to the indie publications. First of all, there's no good small business legacy media anyway. It doesn't exist anymore, if it ever did.
Business insiders out there I sat on this bus bench. Here's what I learned about the seating styles in Arkansas. It's like,
it's just fully LinkedInified. It's really
terrible.
It's bleak out there. So, Lex, with all of that said, what can people find when they come to Revenue Rulebreaker? How do they subscribe to your publication? How do they get involved? And what are the type of stories that you tell there?
Go to revenuerulebreaker.com/newsletter to subscribe. We lift up stories from business underdogs. So I really like to feature typically solopreneurs, definitely micro entrepreneurs, so less than 10 folks on the team where it's a real strong lead. I have some folks that have a couple team members doing something differently. They are going against the grain with the way that they're running their business. They're going against maybe conventional wisdom. For example, we recently published a story from membership operator Erin Harker, who hit like an issue in her membership where she was losing members and it was a tax to operate. It was just like so much work on her. It wasn't growing enough. A lot of folks would say lower your membership price. Instead, she raised the price and cut the offering and changed the whole way that was operating and made back her money, and that membership is now thriving. I featured another entrepreneur who was really worried about paywalling. Paywalling is very controversial in the media space. But then they sort of walked us through their fears and how they got over them and how they justified paywalling now. We cover all kinds of revenue streams. We cover memberships and subscriptions. We cover digital products. We cover client services, finding clients. We cover events. We cover authors and books, all kinds of stuff. And it's really just how are people actually operating in non-gimmicky ways that show that there's some proof of concept that you can maybe follow. And I hear a lot from readers who take those stories and put them into action. A really cool example of that recently is I wrote a story last year about actually another media company and how they did a community fundraiser to back their work over the summer of 2025. Another writer in our community saw that, wanted to open a bookstore in her community of Evanston, Illinois, used that same technique of community fundraising, fundraised for the bookstore, and now has the first Black feminist bookstore in Evanston, Illinois. And it's open.
Shout out to L'Oreal.
Shout out to L'Oreal.
She's a friend of the podcast and of me, a friend of mine.
Love it. She came back and wrote the story about how she funded it and what the revenue streams are. And that's like a perfect circle of what we're trying to do. Open up the ideas of what's possible and dig into different ways of operating that are still successful for people. And then obviously we have, a community side too. I run events and collaborations, and I spend a lot of time lifting up members in the community because it's important to me that people get eyes on their work. And to the extent that I can provide that, I do.
Yeah. And I love that about your work. And I think it is also like a shared ethos at Off the Grid. I think part of the reason that our membership or subscription models are successful is that we are very invested in making other people money as well. We're very invested in the visibility not being funneled just toward us. It's not an influencer model, all eyes on me. It's really about channeling attention toward the whole community and the sort of rising tides lift all boats ethos or something like that. So I love that about Revenue Rulebreaker and you in general. Tell us about Legends. If people want to become paid supporters, what is the Legends do you call it a community, a membership, subscription? Like, how do you even talk about it?
I call it a network.
Okay.
I call it a network, the Legends Network. I do occasionally call it a community and a membership in a moment of weakness, but I really try to keep it to the network because it's not a high-touch membership. There's no Slack, there's no Circle. Basically, the idea of Legends initially was people that just want to support and see this work come to fruition. The longer that we've done this, the more people that have gotten involved in Revenue Rulebreaker, the more it's become, sort of an official offering. So the Legends are brave believers in the impossible, and it is a creative service provider network. Creatives and creators, I will say. I host mixers and events and collaborations for them throughout the year, not every month. So again, it's not a membership. There's a few of those a year. And then I also spend a lot of time shouting out Legends and connecting them for collaborations. We have a directory, folks get a listing, and I'm always on the lookout for people that should know each other, people that should work together. And then I host, a few collaborations a year to really pair people up. Like as an example, we do this thing called the Secret Santa Swap, where I have people fill out a little form about what their audience is, who their audience is, what their newsletter is about or what their podcast is about. And then I pair them up to give a shout out in secret to someone else. And then it's a surprise to that person that they got a shout out from another legend. So stuff like that. What else? Yeah, there's a lot of extra perks, too many perks. I'm doing sticker packs right now. We're doing a retreat this year in Guatemala. So there's more perks to it than that. And it's only $99 a year. And often you can get that at a discount.
Hell yeah, you can. Hell yeah, it is. Yeah, I think what's great about Legend, something I love watching it, taking us full circle back to the beginning of this conversation is like, you let it be and flow with you. When you're excited about doing certain things, you do more of those. When you're not, you do less of it. I think that there's a real benefit to flexibility. And I think that is a difference between like a subscription or network and a membership, where often you're selling like very specific things that you will do on a specific cadence and things that like people are buying that instead of just becoming a part of the network of the publication. And I like to see all the different things that you do and the ways that you innovate. Like it allows it to be a very innovative, experimental space, which seems to be just an ethos of your work in general, and something that I hope I'm excited to continue following as you like do new and interesting and inspiring things that reshape how all of us approach our media businesses or just any business.
Oh, shucks, Amelia. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lex, so much for joining me in this conversation, for being a friend of Off the Grid, for doing the work that you do. I'm thrilled to be in the trenches with you as another independent small business media brand. And I'm really excited for Off the Grid listeners to go subscribe to Revenue Rulebreaker. So folks, if you love this show, I just really think you'll love Lex's work. I don't know why you wouldn't go subscribe. Go check it out at revenuerulebreaker.com/newsletter. If you become a legend, tell Lex that Off the Grid sent you, because that type of tracking really helps us figure out what is useful and supportive and good.
Yeah, I'll give you a discount code. Use Off the Grid. You get 20% off Revenue Rulebreaker.
Gorgeous. All right, friends, use the code Off the Grid to get 20% off if you become a legend when you hear this episode. And stay subscribed. Keep listening to the show. Keep reading Lex's work, because you will only learn more ways to be in business and stay in business. And that's what we're all doing together here in 2026 and hopefully beyond. So thank you again, Lex, for joining me. This has been so fun. I look forward to being off of Substack and with you in the even more independent media world. And until then, folks can find us off the grid.
I kinda hate social media, feeds on my brain like a bacteria. If you read my Wikipedia, it'll say I kinda hate social media. Post a picture of myself, sacrifice my mental health, use your product, time to sell. I would rather go to hell. Do you like this? Leave a comment. Can you share this? Okay.
That was an abridged version of Social Media by Surfer Boy and Rectangle. To hear the entire song, find Surfer Boy on Spotify or head to the link in the show notes. Thanks so much to them for sharing the song with us, as well as to Melissa Caitlin Carter, who sings our theme song that you hear at the start of every show. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby, and if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you will download the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. Until next time, I will see you off the grid.